You know that feeling when you're falling? For most people, it's a nightmare. A flash of terror in the dark before you jolt awake. For me, it was just another Tuesday. Falling was my job. I was a professional stunt double, and my specialty was making gravity look like a cinematic choice. But this fall was different. It wasn't clean. It wasn't controlled. It started with a sound that didn't belong on a multi-million-dollar film set. A high-pitched metallic scream like a guitar string snapping in the middle of a symphony. Then came the jolt. A brutal, sideways yank that tore through my hip and sent a current of pure, white-hot agony up my spine. The world became a nauseating spin of blue sky and brown desert floor. I remember the smell of dust and ozone and a voice in my comms. It wasn't the stunt coordinator shouting instructions. It was her. Serafina, the A-list star whose face was plastered on billboards from LA to Tokyo, the woman whose body I inhabited for every shot that involved more than a brisk walk, and her voice wasn't filled with concern. It was sharp, brittle, and dripping with venomous satisfaction. She said, "See? I told you she couldn't handle it." She hesitated. That's the last thing I heard before I hit the airbag with the force of a car crash. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, but her words stole the air from my future. My name is Eden. For 5 years, I was the ghost in Serafina's machine. I was the strength behind her on-screen power, the grit behind her curated brand of badass femininity. She got the magazine covers for her brave performances, and I got the bruises, the burns, and a paycheck that barely covered my physical therapy. She treated me less like a colleague and more like a sentient handbag, useful for specific tasks and utterly ignored otherwise. And on that day, in the middle of the New Mexico desert, she threw me away like a broken prop, fired, blamed for an injury caused by her own reckless ego. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that my helmet cam was rolling. It always was, and the unedited footage, a crystal-clear record of her ignoring my safety warnings, was my final, silent performance. A performance I had just sent to the one person in Hollywood who might care more about the truth than the box office. If you've ever poured your soul into your work only to have someone else sign their name to it, if you've ever been made to feel small so someone else could look big, do me a favor and let me know in the comments. It really does help to know you're not just screaming into the void, because for a long time that's exactly what it felt like. The whole disaster started an hour before the fall. We were on the set of Nebula Rift, another soulless sci-fi blockbuster that would make $1 billion and be forgotten in a year. The stunt was a simple, wire-assisted descent from a 50-foot rock formation. Simple, if you ignore the gusting crosswinds and the questionable anchor points drilled into the sandstone by a tired and overworked rigging crew. I'd done a dozen safety checks. My gut was screaming at me. I found Serafina in her air-conditioned trailer, scrolling through her phone while a stylist meticulously reapplied her battle-worn makeup. The director, a man named Gavin whose spine seemed to be on backorder, hovered nearby. I kept my voice low and professional. The West Anchor line is showing stress fractures under load testing, and with this wind, it's creating a sheer risk. I think we should postpone. Or at the very least, use the backup crane rig. Serafina didn't even look up from her phone. She let out an exasperated sigh, a sound I knew all too well. It was the sound of her patience wearing thin with the tedious realities of physics. She said, "Eden, we're losing the light. Are you a rigger or are you my double? I need this shot. The studio needs this shot." I looked at Gavin. He just gave me a helpless shrug, his eyes pleading with me not to make waves. He was terrified of her. The entire production was held hostage by her whims. She was a producer on the film, a title that essentially meant she could override anyone, including the people paid to keep her, and by extension me, alive. I tried one more time. "Serafina, this isn't about the light. It's about a frayed cable. It's an unnecessary risk for a shot we can get another way." She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. It was like looking at a shark. "Just do the jump. That's what you're paid for." That was it. The final dismissal. My expertise, my concern for my own life, reduced to an inconvenience. I just nodded. A quiet, tight nod. I walked out of the trailer and back into the oppressive desert heat. As the crew harnessed me in, I reached up to my helmet, a tiny, almost invisible switch. With a soft click, the little blue light on the interior of my visor confirmed it. The camera was active. My archive was recording. It was a habit I'd started years ago, a silent form of protest, my own private black box. I never thought I'd have to use it as a weapon. As I gave the thumbs up to the coordinator, I knew I wasn't just making a jump, I was gathering evidence. The ride home from the on-set medic was a blur of painkillers and shame. They'd given me a shot of something potent that turned the edges of the world soft and fuzzy, but it couldn't touch the hard, jagged stone of humiliation in my gut. My hip was a universe of throbbing pain. My back was locked in a vice of muscle spasms, but the real injury was deeper. It was the cut of being discarded. The producer, a slick suit named Wallace, had met me by the medic tent. He didn't ask how I was. He handed my day player contract to his assistant, who pointed to a clause about failure to perform duties in a competent manner leading to production delays. He said, "Serafina's statement is clear. You hesitated. Your services are no longer required. We'll have your gear shipped to you." No thank you. No severance. Just a cold, clinical execution. I was driven back to my temporary housing in a production minivan, the silence thick with my own powerlessness. I remember staring out the window at the passing landscape, the red rocks and endless sky that had just hours before been my office. Now it was just a backdrop to my own failure. I wasn't just fired, I was erased. My narrative had been hijacked. In the official story, the one Serafina was already telling everyone, I was the incompetent one. I was the weak link. I stumbled into my sterile corporate apartment, the kind they put up transient film crews in. It smelled of stale air and industrial carpet cleaner. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter echoing in the silence. The pain in my hip was a roaring fire now, and I limped to the couch, collapsing onto the cheap, scratchy fabric. And that's when the dam broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic breakdown. It was a quiet, internal collapse. A silent scream that had no sound. The tears came, hot and bitter, not for the pain, but for the injustice. For the 5 years of my life I had dedicated to being her shadow, to absorbing the risks so she could claim the glory. Every bruise I'd ever hidden, every dangerous request I'd accommodated, every condescending remark I'd swallowed, it all came rushing back. I was a ghost. My greatest skill was my invisibility. The better I did my job, the more people believed it was actually Serafina performing those incredible feats. I was an architect of a fantasy, and the price of that craft was my own existence. I laid there for hours, the desert sun fading outside my window, tracing patterns on the ceiling. The painkillers made me feel detached, like I was floating above my own body, watching this pathetic scene unfold. A broken stunt woman, alone in a beige room, with nothing to show for her career but a torn hip labrum and a termination notice sitting in her email inbox. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Probably the production office wanting me to sign something, to formalize my own execution. But the sheer weight of it all was suffocating. This feeling, this crushing weight of being disposable, it wasn't new. It was just the loudest it had ever been. I had been paying for this job with small pieces of my soul for years, and I hadn't even realized it until my account was finally overdrawn. I thought back to my first film with her. It was a gritty cop thriller. I was young, hungry, and thrilled to be doubling for a star of her caliber. We were in the middle of a complex chase scene through a crowded market. I was in full gear, sweating under the layers of costume and padding, waiting for the next setup. Serafina, sitting comfortably in her chair under a shaded tent, decided she needed a very specific coffee, a triple shot, half-calf, soy latte with sugar-free vanilla and extra foam, and she didn't ask her personal assistant. She looked directly at me, 20 yards away, and shouted, "Eden, coffee, now!" The entire crew went silent. It was a power play, a public assertion of the hierarchy. I was the help. I remember feeling a hot flush of anger creep up my neck. I was a trained athlete, a specialist, not a gopher. I was about to say something career-ending, when a hand landed on my shoulder. It was Marcus, the stunt coordinator. He was a legend in the business, a man whose face was a roadmap of old scars and whose eyes had seen it all. He was grizzled, tough, but he had a kindness to him that was rare in our world. He pulled me aside, his voice a low rumble. He said, "Let it go, kid." I shook my head. "Marcus, that's not my job. I'm not her assistant." "I know," he said, his eyes scanning the crew, who were all now studiously avoiding looking at us. "But in this business, sometimes you eat the indignity to buy your next meal. You swallow the insult to get the shot. It's a war of attrition. The goal isn't to win every battle. The goal is to be the one left standing at the end. Go get her the damn coffee. But remember this feeling. Don't ever forget it. So I did. I peeled off my tactical vest, walked half a mile to the nearest coffee shop, and ordered the ridiculous drink. When I handed it to her, she took it without a word of thanks, her eyes already back on her phone. She took one sip and made a face. It's lukewarm. She handed it back to her assistant to throw away. It wasn't about the coffee. It was never about the coffee. It was about reminding me of my place. Marcus was right. I swallowed it, and I never forgot. That was the beginning of the pattern. The indignities got bigger. On Chronos Legion, a time-traveling action flick, there was an intricate sword-fighting sequence. It was a beautiful piece of choreography I had spent weeks designing and perfecting. Serafina was clumsy, her movements awkward and lacking force. I spent dozens of off-the-clock hours in a sweaty gymnasium, patiently drilling the moves into her, breaking it down piece by piece, until she could mimic it well enough for the close-ups. She complained the whole time. My wrist hurts. The sword is too heavy. It's not sexy enough. A few months later, I was at home, channel surfing, and landed on a late-night talk show. There she was in a stunning evening gown, charming the host. He gushed about the fight scenes, and she smiled, that $1,000,000 smile, and said, "You know, it's funny. The original choreography was so generic. So I went to the director, and I said, what if we made it more brutal, more authentic? I pulled from my old fencing lessons. I wanted it to feel real." She described the very moves I had taught her, the specific parries and ripostes I had designed, as if they had sprung fully formed from her own creative genius. I just sat there on my couch, a bowl of popcorn in my lap, feeling completely and utterly invisible. My work, my creativity, my sweat, all of it, gone, sucked into the black hole of her celebrity and repackaged as her own brilliance. It was a quiet kind of theft, the kind you can't report to the police. It was the slow, steady erosion of my professional identity. And I understood why people put up with it. I understood why they stayed silent. Marcus had explained it to me once, over cheap beers in a dive bar near a studio backlot. He told me about a friend of his, a stuntman named Jimmy, back in the 80s. Jimmy was one of the best, fearless, did a cannon roll in a flaming car that was still legendary. On one shoot, for a very famous action hero, the producers were cutting corners on safety. Bad cable, just like mine. Jimmy warned them. The star called him a coward. So Jimmy did the stunt. The cable snapped. He went through a breakaway wall, wrong. Broke his C4 and C5 vertebrae. He was paralyzed from the chest down. The studio's response was swift. They paid him a settlement that was insulting, but it came with an ironclad NDA. When a trade paper reporter started sniffing around, the studio and the star's PR team launched a smear campaign. They said Jimmy was a drunk, that he'd shown up to set high. They blacklisted him. Anyone who spoke up for him never worked again. His name, once synonymous with courage, became a cautionary tale. Marcus stared into his beer, his voice thick with a grief that was decades old. "They don't just break your bones, Eden," he'd said, his gaze finally meeting mine. "They break your name. That's the real injury. That's the one you never recover from." That was the night I bought my first helmet cam. It felt like a small, secret act of defiance, a way to protect my own name, even if no one else would. My archive wasn't born of a desire for revenge. It was born of fear, the fear of being turned into another Jimmy. Lying on that cheap couch in New Mexico, my hips screaming, Jimmy's story echoed in my mind. They were breaking my name. The narrative was already being set in stone. Eden, the incompetent stunt woman who hesitated. It would follow me. Every time I went up for a job, that story would be there, a poison in the well. My career was over, not because I was injured, but because I was being blamed for it. The despair was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, of being a single, powerless individual against a monolithic, uncaring machine. I closed my eyes, wanting to just drift away on the tide of the painkillers, let it all go. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, I listlessly reached for it. It was a text, from Marcus. It just said, "Saw the news. Liars, don't let them break your name." Those 6 words, they were a lifeline, a small flicker of light in the crushing darkness. He believed me. Someone knew the truth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I sat up, the movement sending a jolt of pain through my body, but my mind was starting to clear. The fog of despair was beginning to lift, replaced by something else, a cold, quiet anger, the kind that doesn't scream, but calculates. As I stared at his message, another notification popped up on my phone screen, a news alert from a Hollywood trade publication. It read, Peabody winner Ava Chen announces new documentary, Hollywood's Unseen, investigating below-the-line crew exploitation. I read the headline again and again, Hollywood's Unseen. It was like the universe had just handed me a script. The pain in my hip was still there, a dull, throbbing reminder of the fall. But the other pain, the sting of betrayal, was changing. It was crystallizing, hardening from a messy, emotional wound into a sharp, clear instrument. They wanted to erase me, to make me invisible, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. I had spent the last 5 years documenting my own invisibility, and I had the receipts. All of them, on a rugged, encrypted hard drive sitting in the bottom of my gear bag. The decision wasn't even a decision, it was an inevitability. It was the last move in a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. The secret wasn't the footage from the fall, that was just the exclamation point. The real secret, my real leverage, was the archive. It sat on my coffee table, a heavy-duty, shock-proof external hard drive that looked more like a piece of military hardware than a computer peripheral. For 5 years, every time I put on that helmet, I was contributing to a library of truth. It wasn't born out of a premeditated plan for revenge. It was an act of professional survival, a meticulous accounting of my own reality in a world built on illusion. I plugged it into my laptop, the familiar whir of the disk spinning up a strangely comforting sound. On the screen, a folder structure appeared, clinical and organized, by film title, by date, by stunt sequence. Inside each folder were the video files, but also text documents, my logs. After every shoot day, I'd spend 20 minutes decompressing, not just physically, but digitally. I'd log the file names with metadata, date, time, location, key personnel present, a brief description of the stunt, and a notes section. That notes section was a diary of risk. Rigging crew seemed rushed, verbal safety override from director Gavin Wells. Serafina refused to wear proper safety eyewear during pyrotechnic test. It was over 200 hours of footage, hours of rehearsals where she'd complain or fail, and I'd step in and execute it perfectly. Hours of her treating crew members like dirt, hours of casual daily disregard for the very people who made her look superhuman. It was a complete, unvarnished first-person record of life in the shadow of a star. I had built a fortress of facts, brick by meticulous brick, not knowing I was building it for a war. This wasn't just about one bad day. This was about a pattern of abuse and negligence, and I was sitting on the complete, unabridged manuscript. My first call was to Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, his voice low and cautious. Eden, you okay? I'm fine, Marcus. I'm fired. I know. I heard. Wallace is a snake. Listen, I need to ask you something, and you can say no. No judgment. He was silent for a moment. What is it, kid? I told him about the footage. Not just from the accident, but all of it. The archive. I told him about Ava Chen's documentary. I'm not suing them, Marcus. I'm not trying to get money. I'm going to send her the footage. A primary source document. I need you to do one thing for me. If her team calls you, as a background source, would you be willing to verify the technical details? Explain why that anchor was a death trap. Explain what a sheer risk is. You don't have to be on camera, just be a voice in the dark that tells the truth. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the weight of his own history in that silence. The ghost of his friend, Jimmy. The fear of being blacklisted, of losing the career he had painstakingly built over 40 years. It was an enormous thing to ask. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath. For Jimmy, he said, his voice thick with emotion.
Yeah, kid, for Jimmy. It's time someone turned the damn lights on. You tell this Ava Chen to call me.
His validation was the final piece of armor I needed. My resolve was absolute. Next, I opened a new email. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. This had to be perfect. Not emotional. Not accusatory. It had to be the email of a professional, a credible source. To Ava Chen, care of her production company. Subject: primary source material for Hollywood's Unseen. The body of the email was sparse, clinical. Miss Chen, My name is Eden Vance. I am a professional stunt performer with over a decade of experience in the film industry. I was terminated today from the production of the feature film Nebula Rift. I have maintained a comprehensive video archive of my work for the past 5 years as part of my personal safety and performance review process. This archive consists of over 200 hours of unedited, first-person helmet camera footage documenting on-set safety protocols, rehearsals, and incidents across multiple major studio productions. One file, in particular, may be of immediate relevance to your current project. It is a 27-minute, continuous shot recording, documenting the events leading up to, during, and immediately following a significant on-set accident that occurred today. My professional credentials, union affiliations, and a scanned copy of my termination notice are attached for your verification. I am not seeking compensation or personal restitution. I am seeking to provide a factual record to an institution with a history of journalistic integrity. If this material is of interest, I am available to discuss it further. Sincerely, Eden Vance. I read it over a dozen times, checking every word. It was cold. It was precise. It was undeniable. I hit send. The sense of finality was dizzying. I had just launched a missile, and I had no idea where it would land. As I waited, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about Serafina's career, or the studio's schedule, or the director's anxieties. I was thinking about my own, and it wasn't just the stunts. My real value, the asset they could never fire me from, was my reputation. Not with the stars or the producers in their ivory towers, but with the people in the trenches. The second unit directors, the camera operators, the fellow stunt performers, the ones who knew the difference between real skill and good editing. My mind drifted to a moment 2 years earlier. A brilliant, notoriously demanding action director, a man we'll call Ridley, was helming a historical epic. He'd seen my work on a previous film and had specifically requested me to coordinate a complex cavalry charge sequence, not just to double, but to help design and run the entire thing. The producers, however, were beholden to their leading man, who wanted his own preferred stunt team, a team known for being fast and cheap, not safe. Ridley had fought for me. I only knew because the second AD, a friend of mine, had been in the room. He'd told me Ridley slammed his hand on the table and said, "I don't care about his golf buddy. I want the person who keeps my set safe and my shots dynamic. I want Eden. Her work is clean, it's smart, and she doesn't cut corners." In the end, the studio politics won out. I lost the job. Serafina had actually been peripherally involved, putting in a good word for the other team because she was friends with the leading man's wife. It was another small cut, another moment of being pushed aside for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. At the time, it had stung. But now, sitting in that beige apartment, the memory was a source of strength. Ridley knew my value. The people who mattered, the ones who actually made the movies, they knew. My leverage wasn't just the hard drive. It was the network of respect I had built, one safe set and one perfectly executed stunt at a time. They could take away my job, but they couldn't take away my body of work. They couldn't erase the trust I had earned. I spent the next hour making a list, not of people to call for jobs, but of allies. Names of crew members who had thanked me for speaking up in a safety meeting, directors who had praised my choreography, actors who had treated me like a human being. The list was longer than I expected. It was a silent testament to the fact that, even in the shadows, I hadn't been entirely invisible. The plan wasn't just to expose Serafina. That was too small a goal. It was about rebuilding my own world on my own terms. It wasn't about revenge. It was a strategic demolition. You can't build a new, stable structure on a rotten foundation. I was about to tear out the rot, and I was going to use the truth as my wrecking ball. The quiet hum of the hard drive on my table was no longer just the sound of a machine. It was the sound of a ticking clock, and I had just handed the detonator to Ava Chen. The silence that followed was the hardest part. 48 hours passed. Every buzz of my phone sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I reread the email I'd sent to Ava Chen 100 times. Was it too bold? Too cold? Did it sound like the ravings of a disgruntled employee? I was living in a limbo of my own making, trapped between the wreckage of my past career and a future that was completely unknown. My hip was a constant, dull ache, a physical manifestation of my professional limbo. I spent my time doing the only thing I could, research. I looked up every article, every interview, every piece of work Ava Chen had ever produced. She was a bulldog. Her journalism was meticulous, fact-based, and ruthless in its pursuit of the truth. She didn't just report on stories, she broke them open and exposed their inner workings. She was exactly the right person, or the most dangerous one. On the third day, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was AC Productions. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't from Ava. It was from a junior producer named Ben. The email was cautious, professional. He confirmed they'd received my materials and thanked me for reaching out. He asked if I'd be willing to have a preliminary phone call to verify a few details. It was a test. They were feeling me out, checking to see if I was credible or crazy. We scheduled the call for the next afternoon. I spent the morning preparing, laying out my termination papers, my union card, and key dates and names from my time with Serafina. I wasn't going to be emotional. I was going to be a witness. Ben was polite, but his questions were sharp. He asked about my history, about the specifics of the Nebula Rift set, about my relationship with Serafina. I answered everything calmly, sticking to observable facts. I never once said she's a terrible person, or she had it out for me. I said on 3 separate occasions she instructed me to proceed with a stunt after I had raised a formal safety concern. I used the language of a report, not a diary. At the end of the call he said, "Thank you for your time, Eden. We'll be in touch." It felt like an audition, and I had no idea if I'd gotten the part. Another day of silence. Then my phone rang. An unknown number with a Los Angeles area code. I answered, my throat suddenly dry. "Is this Eden Vance?" The voice was female, crisp, and radiated an unmistakable authority. "Speaking. This is Ava Chen." My entire body went rigid. I stood up, then immediately had to sit back down as my hip protested. "I've reviewed the notes from your call with my producer," Ava said, her tone devoid of small talk. "I've also looked at your work history. You have a solid reputation. People call you reliable. Safe." "Thank you," I managed to say. "Let's not waste each other's time, Eden. I believe you're credible, but I don't work with anecdotes. I work with evidence." "You mentioned a video file." "I do. It's the complete recording of the incident. I want to see it." This was the moment, the point of no return. My instincts told me not to just email the file. That would be giving up all my leverage. I needed to control the reveal. I said, "I understand. But the file is large, and more importantly, it's sensitive. How about this? I can set up a secure screen share video call. I can show you a segment of the footage, watermarked. It will be enough for you to determine its value." There was a pause. I could almost hear her thinking, evaluating me. It was a power move, and we both knew it. I was no longer a victim asking for help. I was a source with valuable, exclusive material. She finally said, "An hour from now, my assistant will send you a link." The next hour was the longest of my life. I set up my laptop, making sure the lighting was neutral, the background was clean. I queued up the video file. I didn't choose the fall itself. That was too dramatic, too messy. I chose the 30 seconds before it. The conversation. The video call connected. Ava Chen's face appeared on my screen. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. There were no pleasantries. "Show me," she said. I took a breath and shared my screen. I played the clip. The video was from my point of view. You could see me looking at the anchor point, then turning to face Gavin, the director. My voice, clear and amplified by the helmet's microphone, came through perfectly. "The west anchor line is showing stress fractures. With this crosswind, it's a sheer risk." Then, from off-screen, Serafina's voice, unmistakable and sharp with impatience. "Are you a rigger, or are you my double? Stop making excuses and do the jump." I stopped the playback. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Ava Chen was completely still, her eyes locked on the frozen image on her screen. She was silent for a full 10 seconds. It felt like an eternity. The only sound was the faint hum of my laptop. Then she looked directly into her camera, her expression now stripped of all skepticism. It was replaced by the focused intensity of a predator that has caught the scent of blood. She said 4 words that changed everything. "Send me the drive." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with her technical team, who walked me through their encrypted upload protocol. I sent them 1 file, and 1 file only, the full, unedited, 27-minute recording of the accident. I kept the rest of the archive, my insurance policy. Weeks melted into a strange, quiet routine. physical therapy in the mornings, long walks in the afternoon as my hip slowly began to heal, and waiting. The silence from Los Angeles was absolute. I started to wonder if I'd made a huge mistake. Maybe they'd decided the story was too risky. Maybe Serafina's legal team had already gotten to them. The doubt began to creep back in. Then, one evening, I got a call. It was Marcus. He sounded agitated, excited. "Kid, you are not going to believe this," he said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "The whole town is buzzing. Nobody knows what it is, but something big is coming. A major story. And Serafina's camp is in full-blown panic mode." "What do you mean?" "Her publicist has been calling producers all over town, trying to find out who's working on a negative story. Her agent is trying to do damage control for a problem he can't even identify. It's beautiful, kid. It's like watching a hornet's nest that's been kicked. They're all flying around, stinging each other." He told me he'd been on a commercial shoot earlier that day, and the director from Nebula Rift, Gavin, had been there. According to Marcus, Serafina had cornered Gavin in the parking lot, screaming at him, accusing him of leaking something to the press. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "They're hunting," Marcus said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "But they're hunting in the dark. They have no idea what's about to hit them." It was working. My silent, surgical move had created chaos. They knew a threat was out there, but they didn't know its shape or size. They were fighting shadows. The noise of their panic was a symphony to my ears. It wasn't about revenge. It was about watching the consequences of their own actions finally ripple back towards them. A week later, it happened. I was scrolling through my newsfeed when I saw it. The Hollywood Reporter had an exclusive. It was the trailer. Ava Chen presents Hollywood's Unseen. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked the link. The trailer was a masterpiece of tension. Quick cuts of shadowed interviews. Anonymous crew members talking about exploitation, about being treated as disposable. Stark, text-based statistics about on-set accidents and NDAs. And then, the final 10 seconds, the screen went black. A void. And out of the silence, a sound mix so clean, so clear, it was chilling. First, my voice. The West anchor line is showing stress fractures. With this crosswind, it's a sheer risk. Then, Serafina's voice, dripping with arrogance. "Are you a rigger or are you my double? Stop making excuses and do the jump." A beat of silence. Then the sickening, high-pitched scream of metal giving way, the sound of a body hitting an airbag with a dull, heavy thud. My own sharp, involuntary gasp of pain. The screen remained black. Text faded in. The truth has a voice. The trailer ended. I just sat there, staring at my phone, my hand trembling slightly. They hadn't shown the video. They didn't need to. The audio was 1,000 times more damning. It was irrefutable. It was a confession, broadcast to the world. Within an hour, it was everywhere. It was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Stunt safety, Hollywood's unseen, and most damningly, Serafina lies. The silent takeover was complete. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown a single punch. I had simply opened a door, and the truth had walked through it. The quiet hum of my hard drive had become a roar that was shaking the foundations of Hollywood. The fallout from the trailer was not a wave, it was a tsunami. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, began to light up. Texts and calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. Stunt performers, camera operators, grips, electricians, the invisible army that makes the magic happen. The messages were all variations on the same theme. "Thank you. It's about time. We stand with you." It was overwhelming. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt seen. But the most significant communication didn't come as a text. It came as an email, late one night. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat. Ridley, the legendary director who had fought for me 2 years ago. The subject line was just 2 words, "Your next job." I opened it, my hands shaking. The body of the email was just as direct. "Eden." I saw the trailer. I also made a call to a friend of mine on the Nebula Rift crew. He told me what really happened. "I'm starting pre-production on a new film, Chrono Fault. It's heavy on practical effects and complex stunt work. I need a stunt coordinator I can trust, not a double. Coordinator. The person who designs the action, hires the team, and runs the safety protocols. the person whose only agenda is the integrity of the work and the well-being of the crew. The job is yours if you want it. Call me. Ridley. I read the email 3 times, the words blurring through a film of tears. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a coronation. It was the ultimate validation from one of the few people in the industry whose opinion truly mattered. He wasn't just giving me a job, he was giving me a promotion. He was giving me the power to build the kind of set I had always dreamed of, one based on respect, safety, and merit. The exodus had begun. It wasn't me poaching clients or talent. It was my proven value now brought into the light, acting as a magnet. The right people, the ones who cared about the craft, were gravitating toward me. The next day, Serafina's camp made their move. It was a desperate, clumsy counterattack. My phone rang with another unknown Los Angeles number. This time, I was ready. I answered, putting the call on speaker. Eden, a smooth, oily voice said, "My name is Julian Croft. I represent Serafina." I said nothing. The silence unnerved him. He cleared his throat. "Listen, we think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. Serafina is just devastated about your accident, and she's even more upset about how this is all being portrayed in the media. It's a complete mischaracterization of a wonderful, caring person." I continued to listen, letting him spin his web of transparent lies. "What Serafina would like to do," he went on, "is make this right. We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, a consulting fee, we can call it, in exchange for your silence and a simple non-disclosure agreement. She would also be willing to issue a public statement praising your professionalism and wishing you a speedy recovery. We can put this all behind us." The offer was obscene. It was more money than I'd made in the last 3 years combined. It was hush money, plain and simple, a check to buy my story and bury it forever. A year ago, I might have been tempted, but now, it was an insult. I let the silence hang in the air for a few more seconds, enjoying the sound of his discomfort. Then I spoke, my voice calm and even. "Julian, I appreciate the offer, but I've already provided a statement of my own. It seems to have been very well received." I hung up the phone. The feeling was intoxicating. It was the clean, pure feeling of power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to refuse, the power to say no. His next move was as predictable as it was pathetic. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope. It was a cease and desist letter from a high-powered entertainment law firm. It was full of blustering threats and legal jargon, accusing me of defamation, illegal recording, and malicious intent to harm Serafina's career. It demanded I retract my allegations, though I had made none publicly, and turn over all recordings immediately, or face a lawsuit that would bankrupt me. This was the part I had prepared for. With the advance I had already negotiated from Ridley's production company for my coordinator role, the first thing I had done was retain a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a sharp, no-nonsense media lawyer named Chloe, who specialized in First Amendment cases and had a reputation for eating Hollywood bullies for breakfast. I forwarded her the letter. Her response came an hour later. It was a copy of the letter she had already sent back to Serafina's legal team. It was a thing of beauty in its brevity. "Dear Counsel, we are in receipt of your letter dated June 28th. Please be advised that our client's footage was recorded on set during the execution of her contracted duties. This was part of her standard safety and archival process, a fact of which your client and her production team were well aware, as helmet cameras are common safety equipment in the stunt industry. We welcome the discovery process, should you choose to proceed with litigation. We are particularly interested in deposing the rigging crew and the on-set medic from Nebula Rift. Sincerely, Chloe Davis." It was a masterstroke. The key was the plausible inaccuracy, the slightly debatable part. While helmet cams were common, Serafina's awareness was an assumption on our part, a bluff, but it was a powerful one. The thought of putting the entire crew under oath, of having their own negligence and her behavior exposed in sworn testimony, was terrifying to them. It would turn a PR nightmare into a legal catastrophe. As Chloe had predicted, their response was immediate and absolute: silence. The hollow threat had collapsed on itself. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. They had no moves left to make. The premiere of Hollywood's Unseen was held at a historic theater in downtown Los Angeles. Ava Chen had personally invited me. I almost didn't go. The fight was won. I had a new job, a new title, a new future. I didn't need the public vindication. but Marcus, who I'd hired as my lead rigger on Chronofault, convinced me otherwise. "You kicked the hornet's nest, kid," he'd said. "You have to be there to watch the queen bee fall out." So I went. I wore a simple black dress, no fancy jewelry, no flashy makeup. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to bear witness. The lobby was buzzing, a chaotic mix of journalists, industry people, and the other crew members who had bravely shared their stories for the film. I saw Ava across the room, and she gave me a small, respectful nod. And then I saw her, Serafina. She was there, of course. It was a calculated PR move, an attempt to project an image of someone with nothing to hide. She was dressed in a stunning, glittering gown, a forced smile plastered on her face as she spoke to a reporter from Variety. But her eyes were constantly scanning the room, darting around with a barely concealed panic. Then her eyes found mine. For a moment, the entire room seemed to fade away. The smile on her face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock, as if she'd seen a ghost. Her mask of composure crumbled into dust. She abruptly ended her interview and started walking towards me, her publicist trailing behind her like a nervous pilot fish. She stopped a few feet in front of me, her body rigid with fury. The ambient noise of the reception seemed to die down around us as people nearby sensed the impending confrontation. Her voice was a low, venomous hiss, meant only for me. "You ruined me," she said, her words trembling with rage. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel fear or anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a profound sense of pity. She was a queen with no clothes, a star whose light had been extinguished by her own shadow. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, calm, and devastatingly simple. "I didn't ruin you, Serafina. I didn't say a single word to the press. I just gave them a recording of you." Her face contorted, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I just let you speak for yourself," I continued, the pieces clicking into place for her. "Your words, your choice, your order to proceed with an unsafe stunt. I just did the jump, remember? That's what I'm paid for." I turned her own words, the very words she had used to dismiss and endanger me, into the final nail in her coffin. I saw the comprehension dawn in her eyes, the horrifying realization that she had authored her own destruction. She had no reply. There was nothing to say. I had used the logic of her own toxic world against her, and it had consumed her whole. Without another word, I turned my back on her and walked away. I saw Ridley standing by the bar talking to Marcus. He saw me approaching and a wide smile broke out on his face. He put a warm, protective arm around my shoulder, pulling me into his conversation. "Eden," he said, his voice booming for all to hear, "I want to introduce you to the best damn stunt coordinator in this town." From across the room I could feel Serafina's gaze on me, a burn of impotent rage. It was over. Checkmate. The documentary was a bombshell. My story, my footage, was the spine of the film, but Ava had woven it into a larger, devastating tapestry of systemic exploitation. Other crew members, emboldened by the trailer, had come forward with their own stories, their faces and voices unhidden. The film ended with a call to action, demanding that the industry unions and studios take real, tangible steps to protect their most vulnerable workers. The impact was immediate and seismic. SAG-AFTRA, the main actors and performers union, launched a formal investigation into on-set safety practices, specifically citing the Nebula Rift incident. The studio that had fired me, facing a PR apocalypse, issued a groveling public apology and announced a complete overhaul of their safety protocols, establishing a new anonymous reporting hotline for crew members. And Serafina? She wasn't sued into oblivion. She wasn't publicly shamed in a courtroom. Something much worse happened to her. She just faded away. Her powerful agency dropped her, citing a morals clause in her contract, a delicious irony that was not lost on me. The tentpole franchise she was set to star in announced they were recasting her role due to scheduling conflicts, the oldest excuse in the book. She wasn't destroyed. She was simply rendered irrelevant, a market correction for a defective product. It wasn't about revenge. It was about consequence. My new reality was a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed her. I walked onto the set of Chronofault for the first day of pre-production, not as a double but as a department head. My office wasn't a folding chair in the dirt. It was a real office in the production building, with my name on the door, Eden Vance, stunt coordinator. The set was my world to build. I hired Marcus as my second in command. I brought in a team of the best, most professional stunt performers I knew, people who shared my philosophy of safety and creativity. We spent weeks designing action sequences that were not only thrilling but smart. Ridley treated me not as a subordinate, but as a key creative partner. I sat beside him in directors' chairs, my hands holding a tablet with pre-visualization software, not a tray with someone else's coffee on it. I was building a world where skill was respected, where safety was paramount, and where every member of the crew was treated with dignity. I wasn't just in the light, I was helping to aim it. In the corner of my new office, on a clean white wall, I have two things hanging in simple black frames. On the right is my new laminated union card, with the title Stunt Coordinator printed in bold letters beneath my name. On the left, protected behind glass, is the crumpled, angry cease and desist letter from Serafina's lawyers. One frame represents the threat they used to try and silence me. The other represents the power I earned when I refused to be silent. They are a matched set, a perfect diptych of my journey, the threat and the triumph. For years, I believed that the price of admission to the job I loved was to be invisible. I thought you had to let someone else wear your work, your skill, your risk, like it was a costume they could put on and take off at will. I accepted a world where my competence was a commodity to be exploited, and my identity was something to be checked at the gate. What happened to me, the betrayal and the dismissal, it wasn't unique. It might have happened on a Hollywood film set, but the story is the same everywhere. It happens in sterile offices, in chaotic boardrooms, on loud factory floors, and in quiet hospital hallways. People who hold power will always try to erase the people who create the value. It's a fundamental law of unchecked arrogance. They count on your silence. They bank on your fear. They assume you believe you are as disposable as they treat you. My story, in the end, it wasn't really about getting revenge on one pampered actress. It was about finding my own voice. For the longest time, I thought I didn't have one, but I was wrong. My voice was there all along, silently recording, waiting patiently on a hard drive for the right person to press play. It was in the meticulous logs I kept. It was in the trust I had built with my colleagues. It was in the integrity of my work. So I want to ask you, what's your voice? What's your proof? Maybe it's a file on a hard drive. Maybe it's a chain of emails that tells the whole story. Maybe it's the respect of your peers or the silent knowledge of your own undeniable skill. Your value is not determined by the person who signs your check or the title on your business card. It's determined by the work you do, the trust you build, and the quiet lines of integrity you refuse to let anyone cross. Don't ever let them convince you that you are invisible. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen or had your contributions erased, please do me a small favor and hit that like button. It tells the all-powerful algorithm that stories about taking back your power are stories that matter. Leave a comment below and share your own experience if you feel comfortable. You'd be surprised how much strength we can draw from knowing we are not alone in these fights. And if you want to see more stories about flipping the script and building your own table instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for listening.